Hey everyone, welcome to another Like a Ninja live stream. Thank you so much for joining us. We have back in the studio, in the home studios, we have Jeff Hunter, our field CTO. Jeff, thanks for taking time once again to come and drop some great Ninja knowledge on all of us.
It is a pleasure, and I am very excited for today's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So you relish the chance to get super nerdy with Ninja. And this stream, I think in particular, we get to do a really cool deep dive. I know that we've got some folks in our Discord community who love playing with the API and getting really doing workarounds, but also getting a lot of extra value from it. We've got Mikey, of course, who is should I say king of the API? I'm not sure. Mikey, you tell me what you want your
If
title to be.
if
Um,
anyone has a claim, it's Mikey.
Mikey's done all sorts of awesome things with it, and he's very generous with sharing his knowledge. But he's not the only one. We have people talking about ways that they're leveraging the API all the time. And so, Jeff, when you and I were talking about potential topics, this is one that came up pretty quickly for you. Maybe before we dive in, do you want to give just a little bit of context and why you thought this was a cool topic to cover?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a primary reason, it's that there's a few things when people come to Ninja to talk about endpoint management, they're always interested in those things. And one of those things is patching. Everybody needs to be able to patch. And Ninja does it very well. I think we are able to be pretty successful at the patching of Windows operating systems. But on the reporting front, there is kind of a built-in point of view with how Ninja portrays patching information. It's all based around the current state. And so this is great as a technician to know when you have to play whack-a-mole and go ahead and actually, figure out where those patches aren't being installed properly. But that perspective isn't for everybody. Some people want proof, essentially. They want to go and see all the patches that were installed over a defined period in time and kind of have a list for each device and all the information that they need to kind of have the confidence that patching is actually happening. Other people want to actually view specific slices in time and evaluate patching performance over that period of time. And quite simply, this is much easier with the API. The API is just raw information. And so you have the flexibility, which is something that I personally always value, to analyze the data how you like. And so we'll talk today about a few different ways to interact with the API, how we can kind of look and find where all the patching related information is in the API, and then actually start to use it and build some reports. And finally, we'll see how we can actually use some of the data in the API to improve our regular operation from day to day.
Thanks for that, Jeff. And before we dive in, are there any, for the folks playing at home, are there any follow along resources that we should pull up or have ready? I mean, I know we have our API documentation for one. Anything else that we should point people towards?
Yeah, I would certainly recommend the API documentation for the purposes of following along for this presentation. The nice thing about the API documentation, which I will drop a link in the chat too, is that you can actually do the call from within the web page. So you can actually go and make a call to an endpoint and see what the JSON return back is going to look like. So I'll go ahead and pop this into the chat in just a second.
I beat you to it, I think.
I don't know if I can pop anything into the chat. So somebody else take it. Yeah, I actually do not
Yeah, we
use
got it.
Restream very often, and I am I see private chat and nothing else. But thank you for that, Jonathan.
No worries.
And so, yeah, that would be a good resource for following along with this particular webinar. I will also say that we did a API webinar last year with Luke Whitelock, who is also very experienced with the API. And I would say that is another great resource if you're looking to maybe do some non-patching related interactions regarding the API. That would be good for that. But this is definitely going to be good for all the patching specific stuff. And I'll also point out this is not something you can access now, but I have several scripts that are very useful for interacting with the API, and those will be posted in the script share section of Discord after we conclude here.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And for anyone who is not yet a member of our awesome Discord community, uh, ding, 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 there's a QR code that you can scan if you're watching us on YouTube right now. We've got over 5,000 members now, which is insane. Thank you so much for everybody in our awesome Discord community. You folks are amazing and great. And we definitely have the best job at Ninja being able to interact with you all. So, feel free do what you do as always. Jump into the chat here if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can drop in the Discord server. There's our live stream comments. We can put chat there. We'll see all those comments. We'll make sure, even if Jeff can't see them, we'll make sure that we relay those to him. So don't be shy. Feel free to drop in questions, comments. Let us know your own adventures with the API as well as it's relevant. But with Jeff, with that, I'll let you kind of take it away here. I know that you've shared your screen, so we'll pull that up, and you can guide people through.
Thank you very much. And I just realized I probably will have to change my screen at some point, Jonathan. So I'll let you know when I need to switch over to a different application.
Yeah, no worries.
So for starters, we're going to go ahead and start on the main Ninja dashboard here. And I want to talk a little bit about just the basics of the API and how to first get started, and then we'll dive into some of the more advanced stuff. So for starters, we'll go to administration on the left-hand side and then into the app section. And then we have the API submenu here. And this is where you can actually create your client app IDs. A quick note here, you're going to see that there are legacy API keys. Those are legacy for a reason. That's V1 of the API. V2, which is the current version, has significantly outpaced that functionality. So unless you're using a legacy integration that hasn't been updated to use the new client app IDs, would highly recommend sticking in this section here and not using the legacy API keys. Now, the client app ID is how we're creating our credentials here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the two different grant types for the API. So we'll actually go into the API documentation here to do a quick look at what is the difference between the two primary ways that I see people utilizing the API. And those would be the authorization flows that we see over here on the left. Today, I'm going to be using client credentials workflow. And you can see we have a nice little diagram about how this works. Essentially, you need your client ID and your client secret. You can then make a call to the authorization server right here to retrieve a token. Ninja validates that your ID and your secret are correct, and it then gives you an access token back. That access token is what you need to actually talk to the API so that you can then get a response back. And this is a nice, easy to use workflow, which is why I am using it today. However, it does have some limitations versus authorization code flow, which we can see here. Now, authorization code flow is more secure. It requires additional authentication when you're first setting up the API connection, that a user actually has to be logged into Ninja. And so the action that you're taking is logged to a specific user when you authenticate the API connection. With client credentials, you don't have any of that. With client credentials, if you have the client ID and the client secret, if anybody has those, they don't need to be logged into Ninja at all. They are able to just interact with the API freely. So you should treat both client credentials and authorization code credentials, those client IDs and client secrets, treat those extremely securely, especially with client credentials, because if these are exposed, this is essentially your username and password for Ninja being leaked. And it does not have the benefit of having MFA protection. So definitely a good idea to make sure that you're only utilizing client credentials in an extremely secure way. Now, because client credentials doesn't have the user logging, there are certain endpoints that it can't access. I'll use one as an example here for pretty obvious reasons, which is the ability to run a script. That could be very dangerous to just let somebody with a client app ID and a client secret run a script whenever they want. And so for that reason, this is locked behind authorization code flow. You have to be using this flow in order to access that particular endpoint. And so this is because we can associate a particular user as being the person who set this up. That running of the script is tied to a user, and if we need to know why it happened, we go to that person. We say, well, they're the ones who authorized this, and so this is, we need to ask them why they decided to initiate this API credential and allow these actions to be taken. And so the flow here is slightly different. You can see that we have our authorization code request to the authorization server right here. Now, here's where it changes up. You actually need to be logged into the Ninja portal. So you're going to need to authenticate that action. You'll get a little browser pop up that says, hey, do you want to take this actual action here? And you'll say, yes, I do. And at that point, you get your authorization code back. You are then able to use that authorization code to retrieve a token. And so you need all 3 bits of information, the client ID, the client secret, and the authorization code to actually get the token back. And that bearer token, that is what actually lets you interact with the API. So we get that token back, and then we can go ahead and make a request to the API to directly interact with it. And so you can see that this flow is more complex. And again, that's because of the additional security behind some of the endpoints that can only be accessed with authorization code flow. Now, there is also a limit on the token itself. I believe it's an hour. And so when you get that token back, that token's not going to be valid indefinitely. It's going to have an expiration tied to it. And that is the case whether it's client credentials or authorization code flow. Now, with client credentials, it's really easy to get a new token, right? You can just go ahead and make a new call, you get the token, and you're good to go. With authorization code flow, it's a little bit different. You can actually use a refresh token. And so you will go ahead, and as long as the token hasn't expired and you've granted the ability to use it, you're able to request a new token before the other token expires so that you don't have to then re-authenticate in authorization code flow. I'm not going to go too deep into that because it is more complex. I think you can start to see the reason why I based everything we're going to talk about today off of client credentials, just because it's easier to implement and easier to understand. So everything we're talking about today is using the client credentials flow that we're talking about here. And with that, let's talk about how we actually create that. So we'll jump back in the Ninja. We'll go ahead and choose the application platform we're going to use. For authorization code flow, I usually use the web platform. And for client credentials, I typically use the API services platform. So that's what I'll use today. I do need to give this a name. Maybe I'll just say this is for a patching related webinar. And for client credentials, I don't need a redirect URI. I know it does have the asterisk there, but it's not actually required for use with client credentials. And you'll see that I think if I make that modification to the grant type down here, you can see that asterisk goes away. So now I've selected client credentials as my grant type. I just need to select my scope here. Now I'm not actually going to be generating the credential. I actually already did that in advance of actually doing this live. But if I were, I would need to select a scope, and I do need to have at least monitoring capabilities for the purposes of this webinar. And that monitoring capability lets me do GET request so that I can retrieve information from the API. If I actually want to start updating into the API, which we'll do towards the end of the webinar, I would need management capabilities as well. And so this would be, for example, patching into custom fields. I would need to have management capabilities, management scope for my API credentials to actually be able to write data into a custom field. Now at this point, I can hit save in the top and I'm going to get that client secret. It's very important that you retain that client secret in someplace secure because you can't view it again. If you need to get a new client secret because you lost the old one, you actually are going to have to come in here, generate a new one, and that means your old one is not going to be valid. Jonathan, do you
You
have
see me pop up and you're like, okay. Yeah, we actually just had a request from Ben saying, is there any way to enlarge the screen a little bit?
let's see, maybe that's a little bit
Oh,
better.
yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Oh, no, I'm bigger.
Got you, Jonathan. No, 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 you got to do this. You got to do this now. Go ahead. That's okay. Thank you, Jonathan. And hopefully, Ben, this is a little easier to see here. I got some other tabs, so I'll try to remember to zoom in when I switch around. So now I would save here. I need that client secret. Like I said, if I lose it for whatever reason, I'm going to have to come in here and generate a new one, and that is going to break any old automated actions using these credentials that I had set up. So I won't save those. Like I said, I already did that earlier. But I would get that client secret, and then I have my client ID right here, and I can go ahead and paste that or copy that. And again, I have my client ID, my client secret. That's what I need to interact with the API. So let's go ahead and go back into the API documentation here. Uh, oops. So we'll actually go back to this page here, this API docs page, because this is where you can actually do calls to the API in browser and get a response back. As a quick note, we talked about authorization code and client credentials earlier. Everything on this page here, as long as you're actually logged into your Ninja account, is using authorization code by default. So you shouldn't be limited by any of the API endpoints here. They should all function because by virtue of being logged into the Ninja platform, you're using authorization code flow. Now you can see everything that we have in here in terms of API endpoints. Each one of these endpoints is going to give us a different JSON return back. We have a pretty easy one here. We have a list of our organizations. We can go ahead and try that out, execute. And then down here at the very bottom, we'll see a JSON return giving us all the organizations, their description, what their node approval mode is, and then finally the unique ID that they have so that we know which organization is different from another. If we go down a little bit further here, you'll see some more. For example, a devices endpoint. Perhaps we want a list of all of our devices. And so we can execute that and we'll get another JSON return back down here. And again, this is live data from our Ninja environment, and you can see this one has more information than we saw in the organizations endpoint. This has an ID. Now, keep in mind here when you're interacting with the API, you're going to see ID a lot. You're going to see it in devices, you're going to see it in organizations, and you're going to see it in locations. And it's important to remember that that ID is unique to those individual endpoints. So that when we see an ID in the devices endpoint, that's not the same as the ID we saw in the organizations endpoint. And you can see that right below here. We have the separate organization ID that would note which organization this device belongs to. And so if we wanted that information, we essentially need to collate all that together from all these different data sets that we have. Now let's go ahead and actually go into Postman. So this is great for doing the JSON returns actually in the browser, but I do prefer Postman here just because it is a little easier to actually see the return back and it goes a little bit faster. So now I have authenticated in Postman. For those of you not aware, Postman is just a tool for querying APIs and testing APIs. There is a NinjaOne public API collection on Postman, so you can get access to the exact same thing I have here. Just find the NinjaOne public API collection on Postman, and you can fork it like I have. Now, right here, and again, I've already authorized my connection here so that I am good to go and kind of demonstrate some things, but you would need to go to the authorization tab here and make sure that you had your client app ID and your client secret input so that you can actually get some data back from your Ninja instance. And so in this case, on the left-hand side, I can see I have searched for patch to see every patching related endpoint that we have in Ninja. You'll notice that at the top here, we have a folder for device. And so this means that everything below is a per device API call. I would need to specify a unique device ID to actually get the information back that I wanted for that particular device. If we go a little bit further down, we'll see queries. And with queries, this is much more broad-based. You're getting back information about every device in the environment as long as they have information that falls into what the API endpoint is reporting on, like a pending patch, a failed patch, a rejected patch, or it has had a patch installed in the past using the OS patch installation report here. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of these. We'll try the OS patch installation report to start here. Uh, Now this is the actual API endpoint, and I could get a return here just by hitting send in the top right. And so if I hit send there, I will get back my JSON return here. This should eventually become a little bit more readable here once Postman gets his act together. There we go. And so here we can actually see all the patches that are being returned here. Is my screen too big again, Jonathan?
Yeah, just wondering if we can zoom in again. It's mostly for me. I'm speaking for Ben too, but man, my eyes. I'm an old guy.
I'm sorry to both you and Ben.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeff.
So hopefully this is a little better. Uh, so here we have our JSON return, and so we're getting a unique patch ID. This is unique to Ninja, I believe. We have the actual name of the patch right below that. We have its status. Is it installed or did it fail to install? When was it installed? And we have a timestamp there. As a quick note, you're going to see timestamps in this format a lot for anybody not familiar. This is Unix time, Unix epoch time, which means it is counting in seconds from January 1st, 1970. And so if that seems like it doesn't seem like an actual timestamp, that's because it is in Unix time. And you will need to convert that if you want it to be in date time and you're not a computer, would make it a lot more readable. And also, I guess a good point there when we're talking about time, any timestamp that you see inside of Ninja, it is going to be in UTC. So if you are not in England, you probably want to adjust the time zone so that you actually get a time back that makes sense to you. We also have a unique device ID here, so we know the device that this patch was installed on. We have the KB number, and we also have a timestamp here as well. So this is good information. However, I'm sure some people can see an issue with just printing this all out and making it a report. And it's that we don't actually have any information. We don't have a device name. We don't know really anything about this device here. We know it's device 512. So this isn't really something that we could present to someone and say, hey, here's a list of all the patches that were installed. It's not tremendously useful. And so what we need to do is actually go and retrieve from a few different API endpoints the information that we need to make a complete holistic report. And so I am actually going to reshare my screen, Jonathan.
Sounds good.
And I will just do my entire screen here.
All right.
Thank
No
you very
problem.
much. And we will go into Visual Studio Code. And yep, hopefully that looks good. Can I make this one bigger? Yes, I can. All right. Hopefully that is a cromulent size there. All right. So we have several scripts here. And we're going to go ahead and walk through some of them to see how we can actually start retrieving information from the API and building a report. In this particular case, we're doing something pretty simple. We want to know across all the previous month what patches were installed on devices. And so we obviously need to think about how we want to design our report here. What API endpoints are we going to have to interact with? For starters, we definitely need this one here. We need the OS patch install endpoint because that's the patches that were installed. But we want to enrich the information that we have in this JSON with potentially the device name. So that way we know the device name where this patch was installed. And so we'll go back into Visual Studio Code here. Now at the top here, I have stored my credentials in a JSON file so that I am not publicly exposing them in plain text to you on this webinar. But in the actual script that I'll post in the dojo after we're done here, I'll remove this section here and you'll actually input your credentials right there. More specifically, I'll say you should use a secure way to pass the credentials, a secure manner to store the credentials of your own. This is just for example purposes. And that's another good point here. We mentioned Mikey at the top of the call, who is probably cringing at my poor PowerShell. This is not intended to be something that is just immediately dropped into production. This is definitely an educational example that I have tried to purposely make very easy to follow. It's not supposed to be indicative of PowerShell code that you would actually run. I think especially for larger data sets, this could use some optimization to perform more efficiently. With caveats out of the way, let's go ahead and break down the actual script. If we go down here, we can see the body that we're going to use to request our token from the authorization server. You can see here that I've specified client credentials as my grant type, and then I have my client ID, my client secret, and I've specified my scope as monitoring, which means I can retrieve information from the API, but I can't really put anything back into Ninja as long as I have my authentication set up like this. And then below that, I am creating my API authorization headers. I then need to go ahead and actually create or retrieve my authentication token. And so I'm calling to the token server here with my headers. That gives me a token back, which I am placing into this PowerShell object here. Then I actually need to create the headers that I'll use to actually interact with the API directly now that I have my token. And so I create those headers right here. Now, what time frame do I want to report on? I've decided I want to report on the previous month. And so it is April 23rd now. So we're reporting on March 1st through March 31st. I first need to find out the date range. So you can see here, I'm actually finding the first day of the uh, preceding month and the last day of the preceding month. So that way I can scope my API call appropriately. Converting those into string right here, defining the file path where I would want this to be saved. You would want to, of course, modify this to be something that would work on your computer. And then here I start to define the API endpoints that I actually want to communicate with. And so right here, I can see my device's URL. And so this is pretty simple. This is just a list of all the devices in this environment. Uh, Now below that, we have our patch report. Now this looks significantly more complex than the devices API endpoint. And that's because we're using a query and we're using the OS patch installs. And this is just what we saw inside of Postman. However, you can see that I have added on some additional parameters here. And this is to make the API call as specific as possible. And this is something I would highly recommend that everybody interacting with the API do. You want to make your API call as specific as possible to reduce the amount of time that your API call is going to take, and ultimately reduce the amount of time spent processing all this data so that you can build your report. And so for that reason, I have narrowed down in a few different ways. For starters, I am using the device filter here. I will switch back to a different window here. We'll go back to the Ninja API. And at the very top here, you'll see device filter syntax. I will click on that and I will make this a little bigger. And so this is a way for you to filter specific devices. You can see here, maybe I only want devices in a particular organization or devices in multiple organizations, devices that are in every organization except excluded ones. Um, we can see the same for location, for device role here, only specific device IDs that we specify. And then the device class, which is what I am using, which is I just want to see Windows devices. I don't really care about Linux. I don't really care about Mac. Or more precisely, I think it would be difficult to have an omnibus report with all those operating systems in a report that would make sense. So I'm doing just Windows for the purposes of this report, but it should be pretty easy to adapt this if you're using the Linux patching or if you're in the Mac OS beta. And if we go down here, you can see that there's more device filter options and they can be combined with an AND operator. So for example, right here, I could look for Windows servers that are also offline, devices that are within a certain search group here, and then just devices that are currently online, just as a few examples. And you can see if we go into my VS Code here, all the filters that I'm using. So device filter is the first parameter, and I'm looking for just Windows devices here. Then I'm looking for patches that have a status of installed. I don't want failed patches to be included in here, which they could potentially be if I did not include that status parameter. I also want to limit to my particular time frame here. So I want to see patches that were installed before, whoops, installed before the last day of the preceding month and installed after the first day of the preceding month. And so this means that I have a limited time frame, a limited slice of time in which I'm retrieving all this patching information. Again, this just goes back to trying to make your API call as specific as you possibly can for efficiency's sake. Now here's where I actually make the API calls right here. So I've retrieved and I have two separate PowerShell objects that contain the JSON return from the API, one for all my devices and one for all the patches that I've installed in the month of March. Now here we're actually going to go ahead and link up that device ID with the device name. Nobody is going to know what the device ID is, but the device name is much more descriptive here. So I'm doing a for each loop. I'm going through every single patch that was installed in the month of March, and I'm saying where the device ID of a patch right here equals the device ID, that is our device. We will then add a property to that object called device name, and that property will have the current device system name that we're retrieving from the device's endpoint. So essentially, we are taking the system name from the device's endpoint and we are tacking it on to the appropriate patch installation. And so that way, we end up with a report that has not just all the patch installations, it has the patch installations associated with the individual device name. You'll see that we're also converting these timestamps into date time from Unix time. And then we're actually saying, what do we want here? We want our patch installs. We want the name of the patch. We want the status. We want when it was installed. We want the KB number and we want the device name. And so if I actually execute this here, and there we go. We have a somewhat limited view here of our patches. We can see everything that's been installed. We can't quite see the device name. That would be in a separate folder here. So let me see if I can open that real quick. And so there we go. I can go ahead and make this a little bit more readable slightly. And so we can see that we have the name of the patch, it was installed, when it was installed, in date time. This is still in UTC, by the way. I didn't do any conversion from UTC to Eastern time, which is where I'm at. I have my KB number, and then I have the actual device name here. So this is great, right? However, let's think again about a perspective. This is great if you have one organization. This shows you all the patches. However, this doesn't break down by organization and it doesn't break down by location. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll come into my second script here. This is very similar to the first. However, you'll see how we can go ahead and enrich not just with device information, but with organization and location information as well. So I'm not going to rehash all this stuff at the top here. This is very similar to what we saw on the previous script here. This is where it starts to get different. Here is where I have added in some new API endpoints to retrieve. I've added in my organizations here and I've added in my location. So now I have access to my device information, my organization information, my location information, and of course the patch installation information that we already have. Here is where I actually retrieve all that information. And so this is very similar to what we saw in the first script. We're just adding more information. So at the top here, we can see we added in the device name. We also are adding in the organization ID as well as the location ID. Now that is necessary so that we can then go ahead and retrieve the organization name and the location name. And so below here, you can see that we're doing the same thing, finding out where the organization matches the organization ID of the patch install. And then we're going to go ahead and add the organization's name into the uh, output. And you'll see that exact same thing for locations here. And then we add all this information up. We are looping through all our organizations and creating unique PowerShell objects for each patch with the organization name, with the location name, the name of the patch itself. And then we can go ahead and output and export this to CSV if we wanted to as well. So now we've taken this from something that is just every device in the entire division and giving you information on the patches that were installed, and we've then broken it down by organization as well. So if you needed to create a unique CSV or a unique output for each organization that you're managing to report independently on all the patches installed, it's very easy to do that with just some slight modifications to our existing script. All right, let's go into the um, third script that we have here. And this is getting, again, slightly more complex. So let's go ahead and go down a little bit further. You will see that I have some variables at the top here to define where I would like to output this, and I should go ahead and add my C drive in there. And then I'm determining how I want to build the report name. In my case, it's just, or not the report name, the report file path here. And I just want to include the date in there. So that way I can have multiple reports depending on what day I have. It's very easy to tell in the file name. Same authorization before, same body, same API authorization headers, retrieving my token, building a new header so that I can directly interface with the API, finding the first day of the previous month here, formatting everything correctly. So looking very similar to what we saw on the previous two scripts here. And so if we go down a little bit further, you'll see that we have some more complexity in here. We have devices, organizations, but we are also including activities as well. So now we're going to go through and parse a ton of activities. Um, that are all relating to patching so that we can have more information about exactly when patching related actions are happening on our endpoints. If we scroll over a tad here, you'll see that I'm using some of the parameters that we spoke about to make my API call very specific. And this, I think, is where you really see the benefit of making your API call as specific as you possibly can. Activities are massive. There is an activity for practically every action that you do inside of Ninja. That is a ton of data to wade through. If you are a very large enterprise and you want to look for patching information, if you look just through the activities endpoint with no parameters, that's going to take forever. Using these parameters and making this a very specific API call is going to drastically improve the speed of the information that you're trying to pull here. And so in our case, again, we're doing just Windows devices. We're looking for device level actions. You will see that there is also system actions. So, if we were looking at system configuration, maybe we want to look at that. But in this case, it's just the device itself. So we can use the device class. We can use the patch management type of action. So this way we limit further, excluding anything like scripts that are running or anything like that. This is just about patch management related actions. And then we are looking for the status to be one of several different statuses. A patch management apply has completed, a patch management scan has completed, and then there's been some patch management failures. So any patch management related action that fits into those three statuses, we're going to get all that information back. And then finally here we have the time frame that we are reporting on here. In this case, I think I adapted this and didn't change my variable names, so I apologize. I'll fix that before this is posted. This says Sunday through Saturday. It should be the first day of the preceding month and the last day of the preceding month. Now, here is where we need to uh, take a lot of care with the activities endpoint. The activities endpoint has a hard-coded page size of 1,000. And that means that you cannot retrieve more than 1,000 entries from the activities endpoint in one go. You need to make recurring calls to the API endpoint to retrieve down more data. Because the activities endpoint is so large, it's almost a certainty that you're going to exceed that 1,000 page size limit. And so we'll talk about how we can do pagination through the API to retrieve multiple pages of data at the max size, and then build kind of a comprehensive data set out of it that we can use just like we used everything else. There are some API endpoints that have a hard-coded page size. Not all of them do, but the activities endpoint is one that I know for certain has that 1,000 entry page size limit. Everything else we're pulling here, fairly simple. You can see the patch report, the OS installs that we saw on the previous two scripts, but I've also changed it up. I want failed patches now too. So it's the exact same call, but I'm looking for anything with a failed status, not an installed status. And I also want to go ahead and retrieve all my pending patches as well as all of my approved patches. And then I actually make these calls right here. I can extract all of my activities here. Now, this is the pagination component. I have to go through and essentially scroll through all these activities, make recurring calls. So while I still have activities remaining here, I'm going to continue to make calls, just extending it so that I'm looking for anything that is older than my previous activity, my previous last activity. So essentially, I'm saying, all right, I have 1,000 entries back. What was the last one? All right, make 1,000 more after that last one, and then we'll just continue to build that data set. It'll just iterate over and over and over again until you run out. And again, that is where having a very specific API call, something that uses the parameters, comes in handy. If you just said, well, I want all the activities and I didn't have any of my filters here, I didn't specify by time, it would paginate through all of your activities until the end of time, until there was no more data left. That would take forever. So I can't, uh, preach the value of making your API call as specific as possible enough when it comes to things like speed and efficiency, especially for automated, repeatable actions, like I imagine a lot of people are going to want to do. And so this section right here does all of the pagination, retrieves everything that we need here, and then we can start to filter through all that information. So where was the activity a success? Where was it a failure? We can segment them all out so that we now have unique objects with our patch scans, the scans that didn't successfully work, the apply cycles, and then the apply failures, which I should probably rename to make a little bit more consistent. And then we can go ahead and add all those different values so that we create one big data set. We're looping through all our organizations and we're creating the property for scans, failures, installs, workstations, and servers. We are then going to go and count everything. So which devices are servers, which ones are workstations, add them to the appropriate organizations. We're doing the exact same thing for our patch scans here, for our patch installations, and our failures. And then finally, we go through when we build a report and we end up with a object that contains all this information that we can easily export into a CSV. And that might look a little something like this. You can see right here in the yellow text that we're paginating through the API activities, looking for the information, and then we pop out with this table here where we have our organizations, the workstations inside those organizations, servers, total devices here. Then right here, what I think is very interesting, which is patch scans. How many patch scans occurred over the month of March? We've counted all of them up. And where I think this is interesting is from more of an MSP perspective, demonstrating value to your end users in terms of what you've done over the scope of time can definitely be a big value add here. And showing patch installations, patch failures, of course, always going to be valuable to knowing what the overall health of patching is in your environment. Now let's go ahead and do something wildly complex. So we can come in here. We have an extremely long script here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go over all of this, but this is, something I would say is not necessarily a report per se. It's grabbing essentially every piece of information around patching that we can possibly think of and putting it into a script so that you can more directly access it. And so if we go down here, actually, I'll just go ahead and run this script. This is going to do the same thing, but it's going to pop out with different metrics here designed to show you where you maybe need to focus on specific machines. And so right there, we have all this information here, and I'll walk through kind of the end result of the information, just again, in the interest of time. We can see how many patch-enabled workstations we have, servers, total number of Windows devices with patching enabled, how many of those devices have been online in the past 30 days. Inside of the devices API endpoint, it has a last contact timestamp, and so I can use that to find out when a device has been online in the past 30 days or not at any point. How many devices have pending or approved patches, what our patching compliance percentage is. This should uh, very closely mirror, if not be exact, to the OS patching dashboard metric, which again is showing you the current state of patching compliance in your environment. We have a total number of patch scans. We have the total number of patch scan failures. And so if we scroll down, let's look at what's collecting that particular metric here. You can see patch scan failures, patch application failures. So if I actually want to see where I've had patch scan failures, I can actually go ahead and just put this in my terminal here, and it will show me where all those patch scan failures have occurred. I can do the exact same thing with application failures, find out what has or what was the reason why something failed for patch application failures. And so we'll go ahead and do that one here. Now here you can see the reason, oh, supplied credentials are not valid. Wait until the update is finished. We can see this one here. Looks like there was a communication error. Maybe the machine was being shut down at the time we were trying to patch. And then we can go ahead and maybe further analyze this a little bit. Maybe we want to group an object by a property, by the device ID. And so here we can actually go ahead and say, well, who's having the most issues? Well, it's clear that device ID 1 has had 5 instances of a patch failure. Everybody else has had only 1 or 2. So maybe from that point, we can go and investigate that specific device ID to find out why they're having these particular issues. Just some more information here, patch installs, patch failures, pending patches that are available, approved patches that are available, just giving you essentially as much information as you need to try and track down where there are issues. Again, I wouldn't say that this is something I'd want to provide to anybody other than a technician. This is really about trying to give you the max amount of information so that you can improve patching performance in your environment by figuring out which devices are having some of these issues. All right, we have 12 minutes left. So we're going to go ahead and switch gears here to actually taking some of this data and using it operationally speaking. Now for this, I am going to lean on a workflow from Luke Whitelock. Oops, I went to the wrong one.
And as you're bringing this up, Jeff, I just wanted to call out for anyone watching here, jumping in late. This is also just a heads up, like if it's not clear, this is basically like going above and beyond Ninja's built-in patching capabilities and reporting. And so basically Jeff's highlighting advanced use cases, getting more utilizing the API. So there's all the things that are baked into Ninja right out of the box to use that phrase. And this is kind of going in advance of that.
Thank you, Jonathan. And absolutely, this is going far, far in advance of what many people are doing. It's just to show that you have that capability, you have that information if you are an API obsessive like I am. Uh, Now, right here, I'm going to use essentially a workflow from Luke Whitelock, who is a product manager here at Ninja. He introduced this a couple months ago, which is automated documentation using API endpoints to write data back into Ninja custom fields. We launched the WYSIWYG field type a while ago, and we had it updated um, late last year to utilize HTML for formatting. And so it allows you to create something like this. This is about alerts. It's giving you a device and organization level view of currently active alerts in kind of a nice table format here. There's some enhanced ticketing. What I want to talk about is kind of the general workflow that he uses to actually support all of this, which is having a unique organization that is restricted only to system administrators, having a dedicated server or virtual machine that actually runs the scripts that interact with the API, having a custom role in Ninja for that machine, again, so that you can restrict access to anybody who is not a system administrator, and then leveraging custom fields to actually store the credentials, uh, the client ID, client secret, and the NinjaOne instance that we want to interact with. And so the benefit of this is you can have something scheduled through Ninja, manage something through Ninja, but because it's running on a virtual machine that you control, that limits the exposure of those API credentials. It's not like you're just running something with API creds in the field on some random workstation at somebody's desk. You're doing it in a secure environment, locked server room, or a virtual machine that you specifically control and have locked down. And so what we can do here, what Luke's workflow does is it'll actually go and write recurringly into custom fields in the API. And I'm not as smart as Luke. And so what I decided to do was nothing involving visual design or custom formatting inside of Ninja. I said, let's just take the raw JSON and pipe that into a Ninja custom field so that a script result condition can actually interact with it and see if maybe there's some information present that it normally wouldn't be able to access. And so we'll go into this final API related script. There is an additional script here, but it's not something that interfaces with the API. It just runs as a script result condition. And so here, what we're doing is actually much simpler, I think, than what we've talked about previously on the past two OS patching scripts. We are retrieving information on devices, on patch failures, and on pending patches. And then we're actually just taking that JSON information and we're just writing it back into Ninja custom fields. So you do need to create the custom fields that are going to hold this information. I would strongly recommend either a multi-line field, which has a max character size of 10,000 characters. Probably I would ultimately recommend a WYSIWYG field, simply because that has a max character size of 200,000 characters. So you have really no upper limit there, practically speaking. Uh, so now I have my device information and I am defining my custom fields URL that I actually want to write back into. And this is a per device API call. So I need to go through every single device and actually write into that machine. Uh, and in this case, I have a request body here where I am saying, this is the name of the custom field. I've called it devices detailed API. Inside that custom field, I want you to put this, essentially the individual JSON blob for that device converted into JSON. And so we convert that into JSON. It's in JSON in the NinjaOne custom field, and that just makes it way easier than if I had to convert this into a string value. Makes it just much easier for creating the alerts on the actual device. And then below, you can see we actually make the call right here where we're updating the custom field for each device that we have. We are then going to go ahead and do the exact same thing for pending patches. So any pending patches that we have grouped together by device ID, we're going to write that JSON blob into a custom field right here. And then finally, we're doing the exact same thing for our failed patches, taking any failed patches and then writing them into the API. And so this means that every device that has a failed patch knows it. Currently in Ninja, we only have the ability to send out an automated report on a daily basis that would show you all machines that currently have a failed patch, but there are definitely people who want to have a more linear relationship, a one-to-one relationship with a ticket that gets created with a single failed patch or a single device in the very least. And so this workflow can give that to you. We can have this running on a recurring basis in a Ninja environment like we are in here. You can see that I have this SIP organization and global overview. This is where we showcase both our SIP integration, but also we have an API server here that is actually running scripts on a recurring basis to populate this information into custom fields. And you can see this action actually right here. It's happening every single hour. We are writing this information into custom fields, and we are going to be then able to access that via a script. Now, in my case, I didn't really care about having this information visible in a custom field. So if I go into my custom fields here, it's a global custom field, we can see our failed patches here. And this is actually not visible to technicians. I don't really want them to see it. It would kind of clog up my custom fields. This is something that's supporting an automation that I'm going to have by virtue of a condition. And so you can see the automations have both read and write capabilities here. Now, how do I actually use this? I'm writing this information in JSON into a custom field. That's the stopping point. What do I do there? Well, we would utilize a script like this. At the very top here, you can see we're using the built-in CLI command to retrieve the JSON from the failed patch. We're converting it from JSON so we can work with it in a PowerShell object. And then we actually can go ahead and check the data here. Now, in this case, I have said, I really only care about this if the patch failed more than 8 days ago. Now, you can modify this if you want. You could have an alert as soon as a patch fails. It's entirely up to you. But in this particular case, it seemed like let's let Ninja have a try or two before we say that this is a red alert issue and we need to actually have a human intervention where we say, hey, why is this patch failing? This ultimately all comes down to kind of operational concerns and how you want to run everything. And so if we take this script here, I can go ahead and import it into my automation library right here. We'll say this is my failed patch checker, just because I have no imagination. I can categorize this. We'll say this is maybe for the API. We'll say this is a PowerShell script. And we can go ahead and save that. Actually, I have to remember what my alert text is. Yep, installed more than 8 days ago. So I can actually just go ahead and copy that right there. And so if we go into policies, and I'll just choose one at random since I know we're running a little short on time here, I can then create a condition. And so this condition would be a script result condition. We can use our failed patch checker here. Now I can run this whenever I want. I'm really only updating this every hour, so running it every hour seems to also be okay. So I'll run that every hour, timeout every 5 minutes if it does not work for whatever reason. Do not care about the result code. So any result code in my case, you may want to modify this so that you actually use a result code within your PowerShell script. That's totally fine. But in my case, I didn't think that far ahead. So we're going to do text string output. Don't care about the result code. Has to have the text string installed more than 8 days ago. And then if I built in something separate to sort of alert on the underlying mechanics of the script, I could monitor for that exit code as well. But right here, I can go ahead and implement this. And this is going to let me know if I have any devices with failed patches. And I can then easily create a ticket too. I know we're at a little towards the end of time here, and I didn't really leave myself a lot of time for questions. So let me go ahead and see if we do have any questions. Jonathan, maybe you clocked a few. And of course, I am always happy to answer stuff in Discord or via email if you guys want to reach out.
Yeah, and Jeff, unfortunately, it looks like we may have goofed and emailed folks a wrong time because we have a lot of folks coming in and being like, "Hey, I'm here, I'm ready to go." And I'm so sorry for everyone who that's the case for you. The good news is, as soon as this live stream is over, the recording is going to be immediately available. So you don't have to go anywhere. You can actually just, maybe you might have to refresh, but you'll be able to watch along. We did start at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So yeah, David, I'm so sorry that the email said 11. Jeff, I don't know what your day is looking like. If you have a little bit, of course, we're not going to redo the whole thing, but you'll be able to watch the recording. And what I want to make sure folks have the option to do, of course, is have questions. And so here's a solution we could possibly pull up. You'll have the recording. You'll be able to watch Jeff go through the entire demo there. And any questions that you have, you can drop those into the YouTube comments. And Jeff, I'll volunteer your time if you're okay with it, of saying you'll go back through those comments and be able to respond to things. David, let's do it again. But no, we of course want to be mindful of the folks who were on their time, and Jeff, yours too. But yeah, we're going to try to make this up for you guys. I'm so sorry about the confusion. We'll find out why that happened, make sure it doesn't happen again. And then also, we want to make sure that you get all the information that you need. So we'll respond to questions and comments. Also, we're doing these streams twice a month. If this is a topic that people want to dive deeper into, if there are a lot of questions and things, we could obviously schedule a replay and maybe go into some slightly different directions. So that's kind of what I got. I am so sorry again for everyone who showed up ready to go. But again, you'll be able to watch the recording, and Jeff and others can respond to the questions that are in the comments. And we can also revisit further down the line. How's that sound to you, Jeff?
No, that sounds great. And I think that there's a lot to talk about here. We really focused specifically on patching related stuff today, but I think that there's really a lot more to talk about. So I imagine there will be more API related content in the future. But yeah, any questions, please drop them in the comments for the recording in that thread. And yes, I will make sure to check that every day and try to get as many answers as I can.
Thank you, Jeff. And then also, of course, we have the questions about the recording being available. So obviously we covered that. We also have the questions about some of the scripts that you were sharing. And you mentioned you're going to be posting those in the dojo. I'll prod you. Posting
In
them in
Discord.
the, okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm not posting them in Dojo. I'm posting them in Discord.
Okay, perfect. That's great. So, yeah, anyone, we'll post links here. If anyone is not who's watching now on YouTube, not a member of the Discord server, do it. We've got some folks here that chimed in, and we're talking all sorts of giving it a good sales pitch for why you should join. There's over 5,000 of your peers in there, and we've got some really smart folks who are doing really great things with Ninja, answering questions. They're very generous with their time and their expertise. So please do check out the server. And as Jeff is mentioning, we're posting any kind of scripts or other resources listed. We'll post them there. I'll also make sure they're posted to the description of the YouTube video too. Man, I'm so sorry about this timing mistake. Feel really bad about it. I'll do my best to also try to make it up to folks in other ways too. Jeff, one other, just to give you a little bit of praise here too, had Marvin reach out to me and DM me in Discord, and was asking for the scripts, but also said the reports that Jeff just showed are amazing. Thank you so much for the detailed insight. So thank you for scratching this itch, Jeff.
Absolutely. And if we have a little bit of time, I guess, to make it up, let me see if I can pull up something super secret that is going to be coming out in 5.9 that will also, I think, be a big benefit to people who like the API and creating some of their own reports. So let me see if I can manage to do that. If you wouldn't mind vamping for a little bit, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now we're talking. Thank you for trying to do this too. Yeah, I mean, just to set the context with this too, and just to re-clarify. So, all the things that Jeff showed, that for those of you who are joining now, as you did everything right, you followed the email. We messed up. I'm so sorry. But the recording will be available. You'll be able to watch that immediately. And just to clarify, if it wasn't clear in the email and how this was going to be covered, so Ninja obviously has everything that's baked in terms of its patching capabilities and patching reporting that's available right out of the box that you can get to use and that you probably are using right away. And that's something, if you have any questions about it, we always have free, unlimited training. You can talk to your account manager. They can set you up with calls with sales engineers. Jeff was actually a sales engineer before he is migrated over to doing things like this all the time because he's so good at it. And the sales engineers are always happy to walk through any kind of specific questions or give you broad overviews too. So please make use of that resource. That's all the patching stuff that comes available in Ninja right away. What this webinar has covered is getting a little bit more. So if you're wanting more granularity in terms of your reporting, Jeff showed different ways to do that by leveraging the API. And I will say, hats off to the Ninja team with the API. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from other vendors that we partner with, saying that this makes the work of integrations a lot easier, having cleared API documentation and all the work that's going into that. Work in progress for sure. We get great feedback from folks like Mikey, who I saw is on the chat now, and many others in the Discord who are leveraging the API and giving us good feedback so we can improve it. So I think that's probably enough banter for you, Jeff.
It was. Thank you. That was very good.
Great. Well, I'm going to pull up the screen that you're sharing.
Thank you very much. And I even scrolled up a little bit so I could have the big dramatic reveal. We've given Luke his flowers a lot today. He is an incredible resource here at Ninja. And he is also the product manager in charge of custom fields. And he has added in a little gift for us in the 5.9 release. For anybody who is in the North American instance, that's going to be coming out in a few weeks, I think, in a week or two, beginning of May. Sorry, that's going to be 5.8 is the beginning of May. I want to make sure I say that right. 5.8 is the beginning of May in North America. 5.9 will not be until the summer, probably end of June, sometime in July in North America, if I had to guess, which is purely what it is. But in that 5.9 release, we have expanded the WYSIWYG custom fields to utilize charts CSS. And so if we go down a little bit, this right here will be native CSS library that you can access to create your own custom visuals inside of Ninja custom fields. And so right here we have pie charts, bar charts, line charts, however you want to visualize data. It's now going to be incredibly easier than it would be today. I have tried to create some of this stuff using custom HTML and the current WYSIWYG fields, and I'm not good at it. I'm not good at HTML. So this is a huge improvement here. I am very excited. I think that you can see how we can combine the metrics that we pulled with the API today. We can then feed that information back into Ninja custom fields to visualize it however we want. And I saw some people saying, sort of, why would we want to use the API? Why is the API better than what's in the Ninja app? It's more flexible. It gives you flexibility, and sometimes that flexibility is king. And that's what you need to get the job done. I always am going to prioritize being flexible and being able to meet whatever the challenges are over sort of a rigid workflow where I'm kind of, I have to operate the way that somebody or some tool is telling me to operate. So I really prize the flexibility on that end. Um, yeah, that was my all the big reveal I could come up with on short notice, Jonathan. So hopefully this is a nice little treat to entice people to come back for future webinars, which will be at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Jeff. Always interesting to see what's coming out. We had some questions about releases in general. I mean, we're at a cadence where these things are happening every few months now. And typically they're staggered. So, we have folks in EMEA who get a sneak peek a little bit earlier than the folks in North America. Our Australian partners get it even sooner than that.
Anybody may have noticed that most of my presentation was in the actual Canadian instance, and that's just because
Yes.
the Canadian instance gets those releases first. So I like to be up to date and ready for what's going to be coming when it makes its way to America.
Our Canucks. Great. Well, I see, Teresa, you have a question about a specific fix around, or looking for a fix for a specific KB. I made a note of that so we can follow up with you right after this with some specific help. Oh,
I
go ahead, Jeff.
believe that actually has a fix now. I think that was the Windows RE patch, I believe.
Right.
So I think that there actually is a fix for that now. I think Microsoft finally released their own patch. If anything, I think David Spunar had a script on the Discord as well.
Okay, well, great. Well, Teresa, I'll follow. I don't know if you're a member of the Discord community. If you are, you can search for that and see if David releases so much good stuff. But you can try to find it there. I'll also make a note to follow up with you either via email or in Discord. Thank you for chiming in there, Jeff. And with that, folks, I think we'll move out of the way here so you can watch the recording. Again, so sorry about the mix-up. We're going to make it up to you. With the recording, you can just watch that immediately. You might have to refresh. The chat will be available too. That may take a little bit longer. And I do see a question that Jeff, I'll toss your way in just a second. Ask questions in the chat of YouTube or in the comments section if the chat's not available once this live stream is over. And we'll make sure to respond to all those as quickly as we can. Okay, so Jeff, one more before we take off because it got in under the wire here. So patches can't be triggered via the API. I mean,
Yes, in a word, that is correct. It's not possible to initiate patching cycles via the API today. So definitely something that we have our eye on, but unfortunately, no way to make it happen without the press of a button inside the Ninja console.
Okay, so thank you for that, Jeff. So we're gonna take off again for those just joining late. We goofed. We got the time in the email listed wrong. Jeff had delivered an amazing presentation that you'll be able to watch as soon as this live stream is over. The chat may take a little bit longer to come up, but we've listed links to a lot of the resources that Jeff cited. And I'll make sure to update the YouTube video description to include all those links as well. We've got links to scripts, links to blog posts, some additional things like that. And then Jeff's also going to be going into our Discord server and dropping links to some scripts as well. So thank you all. Jeff, thank you once again. there was another question about how to keep up to date and get more advanced notice. Obviously, we send out emails that will get correct next time around. We also, probably the best way to get notice for upcoming live streams is to subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll get notifications whenever there's a new stream scheduled. And then, of course, you'll get notifications, I believe, whenever we're going live. And then you can join our Discord server, and that gives you the opportunity to see in our events. We list those, try to list them at least a couple weeks out, the specific date and time, and you're able to add that to your calendar there as well. And of course, we'll send out some emails. So that's what we have for you. Sorry again, we'll do better. Thank you for joining us for those who did. And Jeff, thank you once again. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Leave your questions in those comments. We'll follow up, and the conversation will absolutely continue. We'll have more good stuff with the API and Ninja in general very soon. Thank you, Jeff.
Happy to help.